So one of the main reasons that I decided to start my YouTube channel was to teach history and talk about law and current events. And one of the main things that I wanted to talk about was reparations. And that's reparations for Black Americans, Afro-Americans, a term that we use currently, foundational Black Americans. And this term is made popular by Brother Tariq Nasheed, who is a modern day historian, and he does a lot of videos. I myself kind of got distracted because when you enter into the YouTube environment, unfortunately, there are those who become, I guess, to lack of a better word, jealous, and they begin to attack you, especially if they feel as though you're vulnerable in some way. So unfortunately, for the first couple of years, my channel was growing, and then I began to deal with a lot of detractors. And after that, you know, I did begin to make some friends, but unfortunately, one of my good friends on YouTube passed away. His name was Kevin Samuels, and so it's been a couple of years since that time period. But in the wake of his passing, you know, I was asked by his family to help dispel some of the horrible rumors that were being spread about him. And, you know, me being me and wanting to be a good friend, I stepped up to the plate and, you know, helped dispel some of those rumors. But unfortunately, that made me the object of a lot of their attacks. On top of that, it put a spotlight on me, and for those people who know me in my past who may have had a grudge, it presented them with the opportunity to come attack me. So, you know, I ended up suing several people. I got a few people's channels removed, sent out some threatening letters, hunted some people down, tracked some people down. But for the most part, at this point, we've kind of hit a lull. And so I want to get back to what my original intent was. And one of the biggest projects of, I guess, the late 20th century was, in the early 21st century, was the Reparations Project for Foundational Black Americans, FBA, a term that I described earlier. And it better describes Black American than African American, because we have now, since the 1980s, thanks to the Congressional Black Caucus, we have lots of Africans who are either first generation, second generation, third, fourth generation Africans who have migrated from the continent in the past few decades to the United States. These people, these Black people, have integrated themselves into the Black American community. Now, unless you actually are able to distinguish them by their phenotypes or their last names or surnames, for the most part, they very rarely distinguish themselves if it doesn't benefit them. Now, the thing is, a lot of them have begun to occupy positions and places that have been normally designated for foundational Black Americans. And I use that term so as to distinguish who we are and who our lineage is. The foundational Black Americans are those people who can trace their ancestry to the cotton field plantations and the tobacco plantations and the breeding farms of North America before the Emancipation Proclamation, before the end of the Civil War. So this is back to 1860, and so before that, there was that group of people, and it was roughly about 4 million people in 1860, and of course we've grown to spread all across America, and so there's not one individual place that we can be found, but for the most part, we were in the mid-Atlantic, southern region of the United States. Nevertheless, with the influx of African immigrants and Caribbean immigrants into the United States, it's become a mixture and a hodgepodge. But for the purposes of reparation, there is a need to be able to distinguish lineage as far as, or as related to those who are from the Caribbean, those who are from the continent of Africa, and those who are originally foundational Black Americans who can trace their roots back to the 1860 census and show proof of their relatives. I myself have done enough research that I've able to produce a bill of sale for my grandmother's grandfather. And so I actually have that on record. But the reason that's important to explain to those other groups of Africans that they are not entitled to reparations is because, number one, they're not. But then the question is, well, we've experienced racism since the 1980s or so, since we showed up here, and, you know, we should get racism, we should get reparations for that. And the truth is, there were Africans who showed up, there were Caribbeans who showed up post 1860, but the bottom line is they are not foundational Black Americans. They can trace their roots back to Jamaica and Barbados and some of these other countries and some of these South American central countries. If they want reparations, they should get money from the colonial powers who occupied and colonized those lands and brought them. As far as foundational Black Americans are concerned, we are looking to get our compensation from the U.S. government and other entities, banks, insurance companies who profited from the international slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. Now, the question becomes, because again, in the year that we're living in, and we're well into the 2020s, or should I say the 21st century, almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century. And so now those opportunities arise. You have Native Americans who saying they should be entitled to reparations. You have Mexican Americans and Latin Americans saying they should be entitled to reparations. And in some regards, you have European Americans saying they should be entitled. Asian Americans saying they should be entitled to reparations if Black Americans are able to get it. Now, I'm not going to delve so deep into all those other arguments. Those will be worked out. But what I want to focus on is the narrow issue of why Africans from the continent should be excluded from reparations. And that was the whole point of me discussing why African nations, the African nations who now occupy the land that was occupied by those African kingdoms. And when I say African kingdoms, I'm referring to those slave trading, slave holding African kingdoms that did business with those European countries. Like, for instance, the king of the Congo, he had an agreement with the Portuguese. And the Portuguese, he agreed to, they had a trading agreement. He was an educated man, and he educated himself. He was educated in the schools, universities of Portugal. Like many of the African royalty, they would basically sail up the coast, enter into these schools in Spain and Portugal and some of the other European countries. They even adopted European or Portuguese surnames. They spoke Portuguese. And so they knew very well what they were doing. These were not an ignorant people. These were not an uneducated group of people. They were the elite, and they struck deals, peace treaties, with the European traders, and they would come down and they would trade slaves just like they would trade any other product, any other natural resource. And so we're saying that you cannot, on one hand, have participated in the slave trade, and then on the other hand, demand reparations for the slave trade. In other words, you profited from the slave trade. Your nation profited from the slave trade. And now here you are, a first, second, third generation Congolese, or Nigerian, Ghanaian, Togo, Benin, and that same country that you came from profited. Whereas we, the foundational Black Americans, there's a break that exists between our African heritage and the continent that we were stolen from. and where we are now. We cannot trace our heritage solely because of what the nation of these different African nations did, these different African kingdoms and queendoms did. And now here we are some 100, 200 years later, and you who also benefited from that, because at the time the slave trade was going on, while the transatlantic slave trade was legal prior to 1808 when it was finally abolished, or really some say 1807 when it was finally abolished, your nation benefited from the sale of African slaves. Yes, we all agree that the west coast of Africa, the southern tip of Africa, many parts of Africa are still desolate as a result of the slave trade. But the bottom line is, my whole point of putting forth that argument was not to create divisiveness, but to ward away those opportunists who would see an opportunity to, hey, let me get some free money. I'm black American. Yeah, you may be black and you may live in America, but you're not foundational black American. And so we have to distinguish those who are of the lineage to receive reparations and those who are new African immigrants who are black and they are in America, but they're not foundational black America. Now, the argument is going to be, hey, well, we suffer racism too. My African granddaddy, he came, or my Caribbean grandfather, he was in World War II, and he was Dominican or he was Jamaican, and he fought in the war and he didn't receive the GI Bill. Yes, but you're not foundational black American, and you can't trace your roots back to the 1860 census before slavery was made outlawed. And so because of that, you're different. More importantly, especially as to the Africans, your countrymen that you can trace your roots back to help put us in the position that we would now suffer for slavery for over 400 years. And the remnants of slavery, be it Jim Crow, the crack epidemic, over-incarceration, redlining, all the sorts of housing discrimination, employment discrimination. You're the reason that we're here. So how then can you now come to the United States after we have fought for the civil rights that we've achieved, after we have fought for the rights of equality, and now reap the benefit of not only our hard work, but of the ill acts or treacherous acts of your former countrymen at the behest of the leader of that country at the time. Now, I've already argued in the 8-hour reparations series that I put on, and I'll put a link to this in the chat room, that, if you are a corporation and you purchase a non-incorporated entity, if you purchase an incorporated entity, whatever it may be, you inherit not only the assets of that entity or non-entity body, but you also inherit the liabilities. So let's say now the territory that currently occupies the countries of Togo and Benin or Nigeria, well, that at one point was a kingdom, and that was the slave coast. And so those kingdoms which were taken over by those countries are now responsible for the debts of that kingdom. And so for people who say that, well, the countries that were in charge of slavery, the countries that struck those deals, they no longer exist. Yeah, but the territory and the people and the descendants and that actual kingdom was incorporated into what now is a specific African country, and therefore they inherited the debt. And there's really no way of getting around that. It's basic corporations law. I also mentioned that some of you all are saying, well, how do you go about suing a country? How do you sue a country? Well, there's been some change in the law, starting with the 9/11 issue that we had. As you guys remember, Osama bin Laden was a Saudi Arabian national, and those individuals who were on those planes back on September 11th, many of them were Saudi Arabian nationals. And there is some evidence that the Saudi Arabian government was complicit. And so Congress enacted a law, which went up to the Supreme Court and was deemed constitutional. They gave the families of the victims of 9/11 permission to sue the Saudi Arabian country of Saudi Arabia. And so there's precedent there that individuals can sue individuals can sue countries for their wrong acts. In addition to that, more recently, here in the news, Mexico is suing American gun manufacturers, and the Supreme Court said that was legal, and they're suing them in American courts. So in one instance, you have a situation where foreign countries are able to come to the United States and sue private corporations for their wrongful acts, which arise in the country of origin. And on the other hand, you have private persons, which are allowed to sue nations or countries in American courts. So there's precedent that is set for African Americans to sue the current African nations for the wrongdoings of their predecessors. Now, some of you are saying, well, we don't have any money. Yes, you do. You have wealth. You have wealth. And you have wealth, you have land, you have oil, you have resources, you have minerals, you have all sorts of things that can be used to compensate this debt, a debt that is owed to foundational Black Americans specifically, not Africans from the continent, but those who can trace their lineage back to the slave plantations and the cities and the states here in the United States per the census of 1860. So it's available. This is a remedy that's available. I don't think that the generation that I currently exist in, you folks, are going to pick this up. I think you are too mired down in your romanticism of Africa. I think that many of you are torn. Some of you want to return to Africa. There are those who do. There are those who don't. There are those who say that we're better off here. There are those who say that we're better off there. My position is, well, whatever you choose to do, understand that this opportunity is out there. It will simply require a legislative change and permission from the United States Congress and the President to file lawsuits against these different African nations, and it would happen. Now, the thing is, when that does happen, and this is where it gets even more complicated, you have to understand that the idea that these so-called poor African nations would be facing trillions of dollars worth of lawsuits from African Americans means that they would be apt to come to the negotiation table. As it is right now, here in the 2020s, about a quarter of a century in to the 21st century, African Americans are treated as though they're outsiders when they go to places like Ghana. Even we've recently had the year of return a few years back, but they still have to go through the permitting process. They have to purchase land. There's all these other requirements that are placed on African Americans. And even though we consider ourselves of African descent, they still treat us as though we're foreigners. And so you're still looking at a hostile environment. So how do we go about cutting through that red tape? Well, the quickest incentive to make somebody cut through the red tape is basically say either you can do it this way or you can do it that way. You can do it the easy way or you can do it the hard way. Either you give us this land, with no strings attached, based on the fact that, based on our lineage, or we take your money. We take all the oil proceeds. We take the money that you have. We get a judgment here in the United States, and based on treaties that we have with many of these foreign European countries, we go there and we seize your assets in the banks of London, Spain, Portugal, any other place. And even if it's not specifically designated for that particular nation, it might be that nation's leader. Many of the African leaders have huge sums of money in European bank accounts, which they may or may not have gotten through embezzlement. Bottom line is, all of that is subject to being claimed by African Americans as proceeds from some huge $1 trillion judgment. Why? Because we said so. Why? Because we have treaties. America has treaties with these European countries, and that's just what we can do. And as African Americans, as Americans in general, we're positioned to do that. Fellas, ladies, let me ask you a question. All my foundational Black American brothers and sisters, what would be easier? Suing the American government and these American international corporations and these American-based insurance companies and banks, and or in an American court? Do you think that would be an easy thing to do? Relatively speaking, none of this is easy, but relatively speaking, which would be less difficult? Suing these American corporations in the United States with all the different penalties, and or suing, not penalties, all these different procedures that we would have to follow and hurdles, or suing these African corporations, these African nations in the United States court? Which would be an easier job? Which do you think the public, the United States of American citizenry would support the most? I think the latter. I think that if a group of African Americans got together and said, hey, we want to sue these African countries for the treaties, the illegal treaties that they came up with, where they did business with Portugal, they agreed with Portugal and Spain that they will allow them to come in and be the middlemen to bring us to bring our bodies to the United States. We want to sue them, and we want to come up with a law that allows us to sue these folks for doing business with the Dutch and all, as I said, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, and everybody else they did business with, for illegally taking us from our land. Because it was our land as we occupied, whether you were from a village or whatever, it was our land. And not only did they steal us, but then they came and commandeered our land, and that land now currently composes, or is part and parcel of what is now, we'll just say, the country of Togo and Benin, or the countries of Togo, Benin, or the country of Ghana, or the Gambia, or Congo. And we want reparations for that theft. We want reparations not only for them taking us illegally, but also for the taking of our land. And we're going to sue them here in the United States for that. And you know what? And we'll get our money from them, and we'll get our money from their bank accounts and their oil residuals. Where they send their oil off to get it refined, we'll seize those. We'll seize those proceeds. What do you think the American population would be more agreeable with? I think that these folks in the 50 United States would say, yeah, go ahead and sue those Africans. You Black folks want to sue those? You foundational Black Americans want to sue those Africans? Yeah, go ahead. Let's get some legislation on the books. Because why? All that means is it's an opportunity for Black Americans to bring more revenue to the United States through lawsuit. And they get to kill two birds with one stone. They get their reparations, and they get their money that they're owed. And who do you care? Why do you care if your $1 trillion comes from African nations or some insurance company somewhere? Why does it matter? As long as you get the money in the bank. See, this is an emotional, see, some of you get so caught up into the fight, and you get so emotional about the fight that you forget the objective. If the objective is to get $1 trillion, and I don't know, I guess I'm thinking it's $1 trillion, $1 trillion in reparations, why do you care which defendant in the line of defendants, which one pays? If these African countries want to sue these major insurance companies, let them do that. You sue them and let them go after who they think should be brought into the case and let that be their fight. But you pick the easiest target. That is, in my opinion, the best option for African Americans to go ahead and get this reparations fight started. It would simply mean getting some legislation on the books that grants African and foundational Black American permissions or which give rise to a cause of action against these current nations in Africa. I mean, you know, and if they want to negotiate, if they want to come to the table and say, hey, look, we understand that you all want to sue us for $1 trillion in one of these American courts in DC or South Carolina or wherever. And so as to avoid that, let's negotiate. I know we had a whole lot of red tape for you all, for you guys who want to come back. Fine. You know, I get that. I know we're going to get rid of that red tape now because, you know, we see this is serious and you guys they've already seized our bank accounts in London and held them up in bond and all that. So let's talk. And what that principle is demonstrating is that you speak from a place, you negotiate from a position of power, not weakness. Right now, all we doing is begging. Reparations looks like some sort of begging movement, whereas opposed to we could get our lawsuits together, get the law changed, and get on out there and take what we believe is ours. Right or wrong, we get a chance to take it. They took us, those African kings and queens and nations, they took us from our land. They took our land. They took us and sold us to the European slavers on the shore of the west coast of Africa. And then they took us over here to the United States, and it's been over 400 years, and they haven't brought us back. So what does that tell you? That tells you they have no intention of brought us back. Matter of fact, now that we've over here and we've come to the United States and we've basically civilized this place as far as race relations as best as could be. Now they want to come over and reap the benefit. They want to come over and get the grants that are set aside for foundational Black Americans, occupy the positions in universities that are set aside for Black Americans. They want to take the positions on television. They want to take the movies roles that are set up for African Americans. So, you know, I don't think there's any love lost. I have great respect for my African brothers and sisters. I love them. But on an individual basis, we can be friends, we can be cordial. But as far as the debt that is owed to foundational Black Americans, that is still there. And as many of you all have come to this country and you have not opened yourself up to help us in the way in which we need. Many of you come over here and you continue to denigrate us. You continue to talk about our culture, to insult us. You call us mean names. Then, you know, you have to expect this. There's no love lost. I'm one of the generation that I don't romanticize Africa. I've never romanticized Africa. I like the idea of the kind. I think it's a beautiful culture, beautiful country. But at the end of the day, I've known for a long time that Africans played a crucial part in the slave trade. And that's just simply by doing research. Now, again, there are going to be other individuals, as I close, there are going to be other individuals like the Native Americans. Those 5 tribes fought on the side of the Confederates, so they wanted to hold on to their slaves. There were Black people, many Black people, especially those who had businesses in South Carolina and other places. They owned slaves themselves. There's a big mess that needs to be. So you got Black people, whether they be mulatto, whether they be Black, they own slaves themselves. And it wasn't just Black people who were trying to buy their family out of slavery. It was many other reasons. There were people who were seamstresses and barbers and blacksmiths, and they hired help because it was the thing to do. Slavery, at a certain point, it was part of the American dream. You work yourself out of slavery, you work your family out of slavery, you start a business, and you go ahead and do what? You become a slaver yourself. It was common practice. So there's a lot of people who are going to be stepping up to the plate of reparations, trying to receive reparations that can be quickly eliminated by asking them their status. And so number 1 on the list is our African brothers and sisters because they're adamant about it. And I think this avenue that I'm taking, this strategy that I put forth, most of it flew over your head. Most of you guys didn't realize what I was doing. I'm saying, hey, these same people who are asking for reparations have no standing to do so because, number one, they helped participate in the slave trade. Number two, they aren't foundational Black Americans, and whatever suffering they suffered as a result of coming over to this country is of their own doing because they came. But more importantly, they are not foundational Black Americans, and they can't say the countries that they come from participated willingly with contracts and peace treaties in the slave trade. So they're eliminated, and that's a whole class of people. Secondly, we can sue the current nations for the acts of their predecessors because they inherited not just the wealth of the land, but also the debts. This also can be used as a great negotiation tool in negotiating a better deal for African Americans who either want to return to Africa, either you allow us to return seamlessly without all the red tape, or you give us this $1 trillion and we make the best that we can over here. If you don't like the idea of us suing Africans, these African nations, then you come up with a better idea. But the idea of trying to fight these American corporations, this 40 million Black Americans, trying to fight these American corporations in these American courts, I can already tell you it's going to be a no-go. But if you say, no, we want to go ahead and go after these African nations, these developing African nations with their oil and their diamonds and their minerals to make sure they take care of the children of Africa that they sold off, then I think that's a valid argument. And I think Africa has a responsibility to African Americans and foundational Black Americans. And if they don't want to do it willingly, and they've had 400 some odd years to do that, then we should make them do it. And so again, you negotiate from a position of power, not weakness. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. I'm looking forward to reading the comments in this section. This is obviously something that is controversial. There have been a lot of people who've told me that this is divisive. Don't do it. But I have to be down with my people, and I have to be down with my foundational Black American people, because that's where I'm at. That doesn't mean I don't have great friends who have African descent or who are Africans. I got great people I love who are not foundational African American. But when push comes to shove, these are my people. The lost tribe of Shabazz, as the people of the Nation of Islam said, those who are here in the wilderness of North America, these are my people. Or as the brothers in the Hebrew Israelites say, man, we're the real Israelites, or the lost folks of Judea. So I get it. Whatever you say, I'm just saying foundational Black American, because I like to put the foundational on top of Black American. That's easy to say. It's not so much of a change. Other than that, looking to review what you all have to say in the comments section. I'm interested in it. Thank you so much. Like, share, subscribe to the channel. And I'd like to be able to get back to this sort of conversation. Other than that, I appreciate you all. This is Dennis Spurling, and I'm out.